What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Homie Hangout, where we help others move in excellence. And today I'm going to talk about Snoop, the Playboy president, badass Snoop. He's called many things, right? He's a narcissist, but he's the founder of the Northern Ryders movement, and so that's an impressive feat, if you will. So my knowledge of Snoop goes back to '97 when he first came to Solano. So he came from YA and landed on my yard in Solano. He came with another guy, Johnny Angel Martinez, a night owl from Salinas. And so they could not be more opposite people, right? Night Owl was a bro. He ran a strict program, a tight program. And Snoop was kind of a do whatever you want kind of guy, which was allowed in Solano because, as has been talked about a bunch, the numbers were big. Some folks were kind of striving and wanting to go that route, while a large number were just sort of doing their time. And there wasn't a thick line necessarily between those groups, but there was sort of two camps. And Snoop was in a camp of folks that just kind of hung out and did their thing. He's a great storyteller. You know, he's very flamboyant and exaggerated. He's a charismatic dude. So he was kind of the jester on the yard, right? Just kind of a clown with big stories. The one incident he did get into on the yard was this dude Diablo, black homie from or black homeboy from Modesto, I think. I don't know. He went to the hole and he came out and he was from Oakland. But when he went to the hole, I think he was from Modesto. He was sent to remove this dude Hank Lira or Hank Lema, something like that. And so they got in a fight in the day room. But Diablo had his hands full with this one-on-one removal. Snoop takes the bottom of a push broom, right, the wooden one, gets up, cracks Hank in the head, and then slides back down onto the ground. I was right there when it all happened. And so he doesn't get caught. Diablo doesn't tell. The removal goes on. And his view of that was, it's a bad look for a Northerner to go do a removal and come up short, right? If you're going to remove somebody, they should get smashed. And so, which, I don't argue with them, right? So it's on that yard where he gets the Playboy bunny tattooed on his chest. He insists that the nose on that Playboy bunny has a star in it. You got to kind of squint and tilt your head to see if you make it out to be a star, but it is what it is. He also got the Snoopy on his chest. Somebody had made him a belt that said Badass Snoop, a leather belt up on the hill. So he started rocking that. And then he wound up getting the Badass Snoop tattooed on his chest. And so these symbols and these phrases that later on become the stuff of legends with the Ryders, all started right there. But he wasn't pushing the Ryders, right? That concept hadn't come out. But the symbols had started. And so anyways, he's there. He goes to leave in 98. Now, while he's there, he's getting a ton of visits. I'm also getting a ton of visits. There's a handful of us that were. And there was a handful of us that were getting stuff from family members through visiting. And so on his, as he's getting ready to parole, and him and I had a good rapport, right? We would talk, we would kick it. He'd take laps with me sometimes and do counts, right? And I found him to be an interesting character. And so anyway, so it comes time for him to leave. And I'm like, look, bro, since you're doing it big out there, and he had pictures of his Cadillac Brougham and all this and that, and stories about his trips to Hollywood on planes to take girls out, and yeah. And even if you figure 90% of that stuff was BS, he certainly carried himself like a hustler, right? Like a pretty boy hustler. So I said, hey, why don't you shoot something to my people for they can bring it in, right? Yeah, man, no problem. And our families, our visitors had met each other, the whole 9 yards, right? So he leaves, he paroles in 98. He winds up linking up with my relative. She shoots up there to Sac from the Bay Area to go grab something, right? And he has her driving him all over town, right? So let's stop over here, let's stop over there, this and that. And finally, she's like, look, man, I don't want to spend all day being your taxi driver. You know what I mean? If you ain't got nothing, you ain't got nothing, it's cool. I'll let them know and we can figure it out later. and he presses up on her, right? Presses up on her aggressively. You know, she's in a Cadillac, and there's no center divide. So he's got her up against the driver's side door. He's pawing at her, this and that. You know, you want this type of deal. I have another relative in the back seat, and she has one of those older cell phones, right? Again, it's 1998. And so she says, hey, if you don't knock it off, I'm gonna call the cops, right? Like, get the fuck out of here. And really, like, you know, that's about the only threat that they had. You know what I'm saying? It's two females and him. So he gets out, oh, you guys are snitches, blah, 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 blah. And so they leave, right? And nobody called the cops or anything else, but they leave. She comes to visit, explains this is why she doesn't have nothing. I'm like, man, that's crazy. I leave, I come out of visiting, I'm hot. I go and I'm on the phone, and I find out that he had also called my old lady at the time and was talking real reckless to her. And so I go to the yard, I explain what happened. I'm asked if I want to file charges, right? Internally, you know. And I said, yeah, of course. And so I got to write up a report. I write up the report, I submit it. Now, where it goes from there, I don't know. There's some discussion now in terms of who got it or who didn't get it and how far it went or how far it didn't go or whatever. That wasn't my role. That wasn't my lane. I did my part with the information I had. I did what I was asked to do in order to be able to advance this, right? And I absolutely wanted the dude deemed. I wanted him to come back to Solano, in fact, so that him and I can get into it. And you know, and that didn't happen, right? And I told his homeboy Smiley on the yard to next time they talk to tell him, and Smiley did, and Snoop talked shit, and you know, the expected stuff, right? But so fast forward just a little bit, 98 Snoop catches a violation and goes to Tracy, okay? Now, he had also had some issues with hermanos on the streets, and I don't know if that happens now or I don't know if that happens after he gets out of that violation, but nonetheless, this is what happens in Tracy, right? So 98, he comes into Tracy and he goes to DVI, you know, G-Wing, right? For reception, he's on a violation. He gets endorsed to the Tracy main line. He goes to J-Wing for orientation on the Ad Seg side. Now he had a cousin, Juno Vasquez from Central. Juno was a bro, but he was a dropout, right? I don't know the details why. He tried to slide through to the main line. He got removed, right? And so he's back in the hole as well. Snoop can see him from J-Wing. Dude's trying to reach out to Snoop. Snoop is like, nah, fool, you're trash, family or not. I'm not acknowledging you. So it goes to show that at that moment, at least, he's still somewhat up under the script, right? Like the bare minimums, at least. And so Snoop had taken a liking to this dude, Ray, from VNG, right, Barrio Northgate. There's kind of a whole nother story there that I don't think is particularly relevant to Snoop. But anyways, he goes to Z Dorm in 99, right? Him and Ray, actually. They go to Z Dorm in February 99. And so at the time with Tracy, there's like 250 to 300 Northerners on the main line, you know? And very similar to Solano, some of them with the politics and some of them are not, right? So my understanding is it's a very similar makeup. And you have this dude, Vicente, right? Cheney from Barrio Centro, older, they got the dude heroin addict. And he was the most vocal in terms of the not politics group, right? And Snoop kind of lined up with him. You know, they were cool. Snoop spent time with him and they're from close to the same area, right? Snoop's from Southside Park. And so Snoop winds up slapping that dude Ray, right? The kid from Northgate, the kind of weenie dude that was his friend. He winds up slapping him open-handed. Ray goes and reports it to the fellas. Snoop gets DP'd. And at this point, he's like a few days to the house, right? He's short to the house. And so they're in the dorm or whatever. It's phone time. A Southerner, you know, says, hey, man, it's phone time. And says Buster, right? Snoop hears it. So Snoop goes and reports it, right? Reports it to this dude Silent, who was very problematic in terms of his leadership as well, to say the least, but tells Silent, hey, look, man, I'm gonna go take off on this dude and just send somebody to go with me, right? Silent sends Frankie Littles. Frankie, aka Littles, got some dirt on his name too. But anyways, so Snoop goes. He takes off on the south side of that said Buster. I beats him to the point the dude gets brought out of there on a stretcher. There's another south side of the rushes towards him. He turns towards him. Frankie's gone. Frankie Littles has disappeared. Snoop takes off on him. And then, you know, SEALs rush in. Everybody gets cuffed up. Snoop's getting brought out of there in cuffs, and he's hollering, "That's right, boy. That's how you do it. You know, that's how we get down type deal." He goes to K-Wing, and he winds up paroling on CTQ April of 99, right? 2000, Snoop's back in Tracy. So that's what I say. I don't know if it was that incident or in between when he left Solano, when he came back on the violation, that he had these issues in the streets with bros and got deemed that way too. I don't know. But 2000, he comes back to Tracy, and that's when he starts the Ryders. He goes out to the yard. He takes off on a couple of guys. The story that he went out there and took off on NF members is ridiculous, but he did go out there and take off on some guys. That's when the Ryders are born, right? In Ad Seg over there. And there's a handful of dudes that had come off the yard in Tracy and weren't really with the politics, and some of them had gotten removed and whatever. So he had a fertile ground in the hole in Tracy from which to draw people. And again, he's a charismatic guy, right? And so not a surprise that he was able to pull that off. So he gets out, and in fact, I'm gonna play this little video because he makes reference to this case, and then I'm gonna tell you how the case really went. And so watch this stuff, man, right? There we go. Let's share this.
It's me. I think it's fucking hilarious that you motherfuckers have the audacity to be so obsessed with me. You can fuck with me. My brilliance, my genius. Why don't you go ahead and Google Mensa?
I think he meant mental.
And look at the fact that I have 135 IQ. Who do you know in solitary confinement that has the ability to do what the fuck I'm doing right now? They have me accused of crimes. I'm being accused of conspiracy to commit murder by a known fucking rat, Alex Diaz. Google Alex Diaz, Alexander Diaz from San Jose. He was allegedly arrested in 2003, 2004-ish, for a murder of a 15-year-old child. He was interviewed by the police. All of his co-defendants got on this fucking stand and snitched. And they got the audacity to use my movement as a shield of protection. An associate of the Nuestra Familia, Maurice Vasquez, who I was accused of he's loaded $12,000 fucking dollars. 12,000. 4 of that was mine. He's a fucking piece of shit. Motherfuckers allowed, the Nuestra Familia allowed that dude to snitch on me. And what they called it was counterterrorism. Because they
Okay. That's a lot, right? So I don't know how in his mind he connects Alex Diaz catching a case and Alex Diaz supposedly telling on his co-defendants in his own case to what happens with Snoop, right? But I will post a link to the court case that Snoop is referencing regarding Guillermo Vasquez, right? But I can also just tell you briefly, in March 13th in 2003, Snoop and this dude, I think they call him Shorte, but his name is Juan Carlos Posadas. They kidnapped Guillermo Vasquez. Now, Posadas, Snoop's homeboy, was a voluntary confidential informant for the California Bureau of Narcotics Enforcement, right? So kind of like the ATF, but on a state level. So on 8 to 10 occasions, Posada, Snoop's homeboy, gave information to the Bureau of Narcotics Enforcement that led to hundreds of pounds of methamphetamine and earned him around $30,000. In early 2003, Posada told the Bureau of Narcotics Enforcement officers that Vasquez was manufacturing meth in his trailer in Morgan Hill, right? So on February 26, 2003, they raided, right? The B&E raided, and they don't find nothing. They found some old grungy weed that his grandpa used or something, but no meth lab, nothing suggesting there's a meth lab, nothing, right? Now, this is the first time that Snoop's homeboy had provided information to the government that didn't pan out. Every other time he's given information, cats have been busted, drug has been seized, everything else, right? So in this case, it doesn't happen. So the prosecution's theory is Posadas, right, Snoop's homeboy, is scared that his status as a confidential informant is going to get exposed, right? Because maybe Vasquez gets some kind of documentation, or maybe he starts asking questions like, hey, you know what I mean? Why'd you hit my house? And somehow Posadas gets caught up. So him and Snoop get together to go, snatch up Vasquez and deal with this. So Posada and Snoop's basically cut off Vasquez on this dirt road, right? Posada says that Snoop is a cop and he's his handler and all this other stuff, right? So they snatch him up. They cut, they tie his hands up with a belt and take his car keys, take him out of his car. So his car is just left on the side of the road, right, with the door open. Throw him in the trunk of the car that Snoop is driving, and they take off. But they don't get far because Snoop hits a ditch, trying to make a U-turn to get on the freeway, and the car gets stuck, right? So now they're like, oh shit. So they pull dude out the trunk, and they're like, hey, just stand here and be cool, right? Some good Samaritans come up. They're like, hey, man, it looks like you guys are stuck. They had thrown some beer bottles out, right? Snoop and his confidential informant homeboy. They had a banger on them, right? And so these good Samaritans come up, hey, let's see if we can get your car out, right? And Vasquez dips and goes running through the fields and runs up on this house, and it's just like, hey, they're trying to kidnap me and kill me, right? And so in the meantime, the Samaritans leave and a cop pulls up, and the cop's like, hey, what's going on, right? Again, let's try to help. While the cop is there dealing with them, a report comes in over the radio about what Vasquez is saying when he's over there at this other house that he ran to, right? And now a cop has responded there. And so he's over there like, hey, a car matching this description, these dudes, this is what happened, blah, blah, blah. So that's put out over the radio, and the cops standing in front of Vasquez and a confidential informant are like, oh, snap, I got you guys, right? They find a pistol, they find Vasquez's keys, they find some beer bottles, the whole 9 yards. And there's some conversations in the back seat that are recorded between Snoop and a confidential informant. But nonetheless, that's the case that he catches. It is true that Vasquez testifies against him, right? He needed a Spanish interpreter, but he testified against him. And it's also true that Snoop and or the informant provided some information to their attorneys because they had an alternate theory that this dude was a drug dealer. It was a drug debt. He's the one that had the gun. He this, he that. So when it comes to telling, it seems like everybody was kind of telling on each other. But nonetheless, they get convicted, right? They do get convicted. And Snoop gets like, I don't know, 19 years, right? And Posadas gets 25 to life, right? And so that's that case that he's talking about in this video where he's like, man, poor me, the NF did, cyber warfare or whatever, covert operations against me to tell on me. It's his story, man. But speaking of his story, here's a little something else for you, right?
when I came to prison in the state of California, Salinas Valley, Pine Desert, Folsom Sea Yard. And what did I do? I gave the opportunity to do what you said you were going to do. And kill me. But I can't be killed. Why? Because of these. I have the privilege of framing with the late Storm from the Fairtex Academy of San Francisco. Rest in peace, Playboy. When I met that dude, at that time, I was training in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
This is exactly what he sounded like in Solano. This is exactly what he was like.
I always had the ability to come with him.
I mean, not all that, but
I posted him. I'm a knockout artist. I've been knocking niggas off stage in the left. I've been chunky. I've been ready. Motherfuckers the opportunity to come get this. See?
okay. So about that, right? There's no arguing that Snoop has hands. That's what everybody has said. I've never seen him fight. I saw him hit somebody with a broom, but he hit him pretty hard. And I've heard it from enough people that I feel like there's at least an element of truth to it. And even people that don't like him have said that he can fight, right? But all that, I hit every yard. So again, he comes up with the Ryders in Tracy, right? He winds up going up to High Desert. It's true. The yard he goes to in High Desert is already established. The Nueva Flores have established that yard already. And so the Ryders are welcome there. Snoop is welcome there. Everything's cool, right? And so yeah, he was recruiting and whatnot. And at that time, they still did send some Northerners that subscribe to the NF belief system. They still did send some of those to that yard. They don't anymore, but at the time they did. And when that would happen, they would get took off on, right? And a lot of times with a weapon. And so that is true. There was a couple events that happened there. I actually broke all that down in my spiel on the Nueva Flores. So you can go there and hear the details. I mentioned Snoop in it, in this aspect, right? They were getting off with one group, they're getting off with another group. And in that, one of the ones they're getting off with is the others. Snoop and the Flores are walking around on the tier. They slip their cuffs. They get this poly dude. I believe they throw him off the tier. Snoop makes reference to that in a video on somebody else's channel where he's like, I'm gonna show never before seen paperwork. I don't think that paperwork's ever come out. But dude gets thrown off the tier, right? That's true. And Snoop is a part of that. The administration says, we're gonna break this up because you guys have been over here talking about you're not like the structure, but you're starting to act like it now with these organized hits, which actually weren't organized hits. It was a matter of just kind of coincidence. But nonetheless, they said, we're going to send you guys out to all these different prisons. That is when Snoop turns the Ryders into a sensitive needs gang, into a PC gang. And so I know he's done interviews before about how, he didn't know about S&Y yards and Mill Creek. That's BS because we all knew about S&Y yards on Mill Creek in 98 before he left Solano. So it's just not true that he didn't know what they were and he had no idea, right? And then he's like, I was going to what you call 50-50 yards. 50-50 yards didn't come out until just a handful of years ago. I did a video on these terms and where they come from. I will link to it again at the end. You can go check it out. But nonetheless, he goes to that Ryders, he goes to that yard. When faced with the prospect of being shot to another yard where you're going to have to fight to try to get a presence there, he's like, nah, we're going to check it in. We're going to go to S&Y and we're going to get our numbers up. And then we're going to go back out and attack the Northerners or the NF. I don't know what the game plan was, but that's where the Ryders got famous. The Ryders got famous as an S&Y clique. That's why a lot of their people do have sketchy charges and that kind of stuff. It's not to say that they're all weak. You know, it's not to say that, it's not to say anything about all of them. It baffles me that Snoop has been able to create this movement. I think it speaks to the disappointment and the animosity that people have towards the NF, more so than necessarily the integrity or the validity of the Ryders, right? Because he's all over the map, right? He's a narcissist, he's a pathological liar, and yet he is worshipped by some people. And so I think that's just a reflection of what they don't want to be a part of, more than necessarily what they do. But I mean, who am I to say? I don't know. And anyways, that's Snoop, that's the Ryders. He did wind up getting convicted on these conspiracy charges. He got a boatload of time. He's not coming home. He had that incident with Scrappy. I don't know all the details. It's a bunch of people that left and tried to start these other cliques that all went S and Y and now are competing over who's the toughest, and that just doesn't make sense to me, right? But anyways, here, I know a lot of you guys know that I had a history with Snoop. I've talked about it before in some places. It's been talked about by other folks, and so I figured I'd just air it all out there. Have at it. Check out the other content, man. There's stuff a lot better than this. Help others move in excellence. That's what homies do. Help yourself at the same time because you're worth it, and help your community because they need you. Take care.